This is not a reaction to the recent drama. I don't care about that stuff. I just want to give my thoughts on the state of the game. I haven't done a video in a while, and here we are. First, I want to touch on Phase 1. I intended to do a Phase 1 review video, but I never got around to it. Overall, I do think Phase 1 was a successful test. The goal was to test server stability, and I think servers did improve massively overall. However, they started from a very low baseline. 500 versus 500 battles are still very far from being a reality, but there's been some pretty solid progress made on the server stability front. Phase 2's launch was rough. I don't think too many would deny that, and overall, not a lot has been added that really separates Phase 2 from Phase 1 so far. Phase 2 is supposed to focus on node advancement, vassalling, and the economic systems, but those systems are all roughly in the same state as Phase 1. The major things added were an expansion to the desert with 3 new nodes, a very rudimentary version of freeholds, and the Befallen Forge dungeon. I've spent a lot of time in the Forge, and it's a fantastic dungeon. I would say it's the best POI in the game currently. The mobs actually have meaningful mechanics, some of the bosses are actually somewhat challenging, and the dungeon itself is just fantastic looking overall. Overall, I want to say I'm still a big believer in the project. I know I've been critical in the past, but I've always kept my criticism reasonable and not hateful. And while some are falling off, I am as committed as ever to this project, and I'm not going anywhere. That being said, I still think there's a lot to talk about in terms of the state of the game. I know the alpha test is not indicative of what the game will be by launch, but I do think to some extent the foundations of the game are being laid down. And with that, I do worry a bit about how unfriendly this game is to a casual audience. I've played the alpha at a hardcore level, racing to 25 as fast as I could in both phases, but the vast majority of MMO players are not hardcore, and I don't see much of a place for them in this game currently. And that's a problem for the long-term health of the game, in my opinion. Now, once systems like story arcs and a true questing system come in, maybe that will change. But right now, I think the game is looking extremely niche in comparison to every other major MMO on the market. And while that's fine, and while I'll still play it because I love games of this style, I'm not sure with how much it's going to cost to develop this game that's going to be sustainable. Next, this game is highly tailored towards guilds, which I love because I run a large competitive guild of sweaty nerds, and hey, if you need a guild, maybe you should think about joining us. However, currently, the extreme lack of guild features is rough to deal with. For a game that is heavily focused on guilds, I'd love to see some quality of life features moved up the priority list for the developers sooner rather than later. I know that Steven said that next month guild warehouses and maybe even guild progression are on the way. But really, this stuff is needed desperately because guild management in this game is absolutely incredibly painful currently. For me, this would be the priority list of what I would love to see added in terms of guild features. Number 1, guild warehouses. By far and away, this is my number 1 thing I want to see added to the game over any other feature. This would drastically improve things for the economic teams, or the artisan teams, whatever you guys call them, within your guilds. Number 2, some sort of guild progression or just a static increase of the guild cap, or maybe put the alliance system in quicker than was planned. It is very difficult to manage 5 or 6 different in-game guilds and to make sure the right people are getting in each guild. So just increase the cap temporarily until you get progression in would be a nice stopgap solution. Number 3, standard MMO invite features. Being able to right-click someone in global or say chat to add to a group or add to a guild. Typing /invite space name is a nightmare to do for a full raid of people, so some basic features that make it easier would be ideal. I'd also love if Intrepid considers the ability to allow players to apply for a group or apply for a guild in-game. A lot of MMOs do this, and it's a massive quality of life feature. This way, if someone wants to join into a raid group, they can in essence invite themselves, and we just have to approve it, and it would make things 10 times easier. Same with guilds. In Throne and Liberty, they had a feature that allowed people to apply for a guild in-game or use a code to join a guild, or you could set it to invite only. There's a lot of different options. That kind of system would be amazing to see in Ashes. Next is guild markers or guild pins on the map. Another feature that Throne had that I'd love to see added to Ashes is guild pins, which were placed on the map. Everyone could see them that was in your guild. This drastically improved communication amongst the guilds, so I could say place guild pin 1 down and everyone could go to guild pin 1. In larger fights, I could pre-place 10 different guild pins down, or however many they allowed, and use them to move people around. I could say things like push to pin 1, fall back to pin 5, etc. The problem is with a guild cap of 50, it still would make things difficult to communicate, so adding this after the guild cap is raised would be useful. Currently, we have to use cardinal directions and geographic locations to move people around, like go to Dick Lake. But since all the lakes in Ashes look like dicks, that doesn't work sometimes either. And number 5, this isn't necessarily guild related, I guess, but assist functionality. I know take target of friendly target is still a work in progress feature, but as a shot caller for my guild in PvP, I'd love to see that feature actually exist. So that's my feedback on guilds. Next, I want to talk about feedback on guild wars and to an extent node wars as well, which have been a hot button topic in phase 2. But first, you guys know what time it is. Dude, it's like, fight me, Rev. Like, I'm in a giant cock suit and I can't see anything. Guild wars, I think, are great and a great feature for guilds, but they need some work. So with that, these are some changes I would propose to the guild war system. These are just suggestions and ideas to be tossed around. Not anything I'm saying has to happen. These are just ideas to toss around and discuss. Some of this applies to node wars as well. Number 1, there really should be a timer before a guild war starts. I'm not going to name any names, but we saw firsthand early in phase 2 how some guilds would declare war on guilds that are standing at storage and nodes in order to kill them and take as many gatherables as possible. So a timer before a war starts to avoid wars being used to take things without consequence, I think, is necessary. Also, it tends to be a way to get the jump on another guild and usually just to win the war because you get the jump. Having a delay or only allowing guild wars to happen during server prime time with a 4-hour minimum declare time, I think would be ideal. Next, a cooldown before another war can be declared on the same guild or just a timer in general on war decks. This would make war decks meaningful and not spammable. I know this was already said to be coming, but I think this would be a nice improvement. Number 3, I really think the special wars like the fishing derby and the lumberjacking race should be modified heavily from their current form. Currently, guilds use them over the regular guild war because regular guild wars cost a lot more. If that continues to be the case, then make regular guild wars have much better rewards. Or just adjust the price of the regular war to be more in line with the fishing and lumber wars. Also, maybe just only allow PvP for the fishing and lumber wars in the designated area. This would prevent using them to grief AFK people at storage in a node. Maybe even add in some mechanics where the fishing event, for instance, allows you to catch a specific event fish that can only be turned in at an NPC in the event area, but you can PvP and take all the fish from someone and turn them in. For those that play TL, this would be similar to, say, the Wolf Tales event. Also, maybe dying in PvP means you can't fish for a while. Just some ideas to make those events more meaningful and interesting. Next, the guild cap of 50 creates all kinds of issues with wars. A lot of people use them to contest world bosses. The issue is you have to declare on like 3 guilds a lot of times to do it properly. Next, players should really not drop materials during wars. This would prevent the abuse of the system to target high-value gatherers, which I have seen happen quite a few times. And next, this might be a controversial one, but I don't think guild or even node wars should allow PvP within the node. This would prevent the massive loss of materials that a gatherer can suffer. And finally, Emberstone protection often still bugs, and spawn camping is still a thing that happens way too often. And so that's my war feedback. Now some more general feedback. I think the death penalty is overly harsh. Dropping a bright glint is absolutely brutal, and it happens if you farm long enough without returning to storage. Gatherers that spend hours gathering before returning to a node can lose hours of work if they die. The current drop percentage on materials to me is just too high, at least for alpha with all the bugs that currently exist. Maybe if all the bugs and random ways you can die didn't exist, and the bad mob AI that makes training mobs quite easy for people, maybe if all that didn't exist, then the percentages right now would be okay. But currently, non-combatants drop 50% of their material storage on death, and 25% of that is just straight up deleted, and only 25% is recoverable. To me, that's just way too harsh. In addition, XP debt is absolutely brutal as you level, especially above level 20. At 25, it's manageable and reasonable. Below 25, it's brutal, especially in this alpha with how glitchy everything is. Now, I know I'm going to get the Rive as a Care Bear comments coming rolling in. And personally, I don't care that much about it. I can handle it. I can handle losing things. I'm used to PvP games. But I do wonder how many others will be able to handle how harsh the death penalty currently is in the long term. Next, I really do think the drop system is terrible in this game. I think not being able to get drops from mobs you outlevel is brutal and leads to bad behaviors. The mob training in areas like Highwayman Hills, where materials drop that are needed for crafting, is rampant. And people are making the excuse that the only way to get those materials as a high-level player is to do said training. The reality is, what my guild does instead of being assholes is we make some alts and we go level up in those areas and get those mats and send them to our crafters. That's the non-toxic way to do it, but it's still painful. It's very painful. You have to level up to a certain level to be able to do the content in the area, and then you can only do it for a set amount of levels before you can't get drops anymore, and it's just very clunky. And there's some gatekeeping on some of these materials you need for crafting. You can only get it at set levels, and that's, to me, just bad game design and needs rethought. And I know it could just be like a placeholder thing for the alpha, but it really needs looked at. Also, the reverse, where low levels being in a party can block drops for higher levels, I think that is completely silly as well. And next, the tuning between crafting and player levels is off. Crafters can make the best shit. They can. But it does take a long time and a tremendous amount of effort and work to get to that point. And it is relying on buildings being built in nodes. Journeyman buildings take forever to build and are insanely expensive to build. And the node system doesn't make it clear or easy for mayors to communicate with citizens what they need to do to get buildings up faster. And overall, players just kind of outlevel the crafters. Crafters level slower to get the requisite materials to make gear that's better than dropped gear. Takes forever. And so there's this big disconnect where max level players are waiting on crafters to level up, waiting on buildings to get up, and crafters in a lot of cases cannot make the best gear for quite some time. They eventually do. They eventually can, but it's not mass produced by any means, and it still takes a long time to get the gear out to a large guild, for instance, and then that creates tension. And then overall, I think the game currently is just not being tested in a manner that's indicative of what the game will be like by launch. So currently, gathering spawns are highly contested to the point where, in my guild, we've had to organize special gathering events with PvPers specifically there to protect the gatherers to contest certain resources that are highly in demand and highly contested. But by launch, the map's going to be like 10 times larger with a only moderate increase in the number of concurrent players, so people will be much more spread out, and not every single resource or grind spot in the game will be massively contested like it currently is. The next point, this really isn't on the developers, but I think this game attracted a lot of people that never played Arcade, or Lineage 2, or Darkfall, or any other sort of brutal PvP game that's out there. At least not brutal PvP MMOs. So there's been this huge adjustment and a lot of hurt feelings over people just playing the game as intended. That's been tough to work through, managing all the PMs I get from people that expect my guild, for instance, to literally never, ever PvP their guild. That has died down some, and I've noticed as people have started to either get used to the game or they've moved on that I'm getting less and less of those PMs. I'm not sure there's much Intrepid can do about this, but people do need to be aware this game is not for everyone and get used to being PvP'd on occasion. It does happen. It's part of the game. Your caravans will get attacked, guys. It's not the end of the world. Ours get attacked all the time, and I don't cry about it. So stop crying to me about your caravans getting attacked by Genesis. It's not the end of the world. To finish this out, the game still has a long ways to go. This is something I've said for a long time, and this is something more and more people are starting to realize. Now, I think we'll probably see a big surge in development at some point. Once they get the Riverlands fully complete, get most of the systems in a good state, get the current game-breaking bugs and issues addressed, maybe then we see that surge happen. And while I think it's highly unlikely, maybe we see the game come out in, say, 2 years from now, like some people still think. But I will still say I think we have 3 to 5 more years left of development. I think we're maybe 10 to 15% through development at this point if you compare what is in the game to the total scope of the game. And that is fine, as long as they have the funding to finish the game. That's not an issue. If not, well, then some serious consideration on reducing the overall scope of the game. It might need to be seriously considered at some point. And I will add that Steven's recent handling of the drama surrounding Narc was, in my opinion, very well handled. It gave me increased optimism for the project. And to be fair, I've always been optimistic on this project. I am critical at times, but that doesn't mean I'm not overall optimistic. Further going into Phase 2, there was some toxicity directed towards my guild and Axiom's leaders and Divine Order's leaders and some other guilds that we are friendly with. Some pretty bad stuff happened, especially towards the GM of Axiom. And then, yeah, I won't get into all of it, but it's really bad, really bad stuff. It was all reported to Steven, and Steven did announce and address that he's looking into this in an announcement. Unfortunately, there hasn't really been actions taken yet that I have seen anyways. And I get it. They're busy and they're making sure they get it right. So I understand. I'd never have PM Steven, like ever. And I know he's a busy man. I don't want to waste his time, right? I know a lot of other content creators, they do talk to him and PM him like often. And some of the stuff that I see that they PM him over, I'm like, and don't bother him with small stuff like that. But I felt this was like big enough that I wanted to reach out. And he sent me a nice message back like immediately after I thanked him for making that announcement. And that means a lot to me, that he's so responsive, which that means a lot. He's like very responsive. He works extremely hard, and he cares obviously immensely about this project. The guy put in insane hours during the holidays to keep the game running while the developers were taking their holiday break. He goes on people's streams. He even finds time to stream on his own. I think he's doing a fantastic job overall, and my confidence in the project currently is as high as it has ever been, quite frankly. And the core of the game is solid already. Combat is very good in the game. PvP is very fun as well when the servers work. A lot needs added to the game, but the core is overall solid. And with that, that's the end of this video. I hope to get some more videos out, but no guarantees, as unfortunately being a guild leader does take up a tremendous amount of my time. But I'm going to try, and I'll see you guys in the next video.